Excuse me, could my daughter get some water, please? The flight attendant, Rachel Simmons, looked directly at David Thompson, then turned away without a word. She walked past his young daughter, Emma, who had been sitting quietly in seat 12F, visibly thirsty. "Orange juice for you, sir?" Rachel cheerfully asked the white businessman in 12E, right next to them. She handed him a crystal glass and warm towel with a practiced smile. David raised his hand again. "Miss, we have been waiting." Rachel's eyes passed right through him like he was made of air. She continued serving everyone else in the business class cabin, everyone except the black father and his little girl. Emma tugged her father's sleeve, confused. "Daddy, why won't the nice lady help us?" The answer would shock the entire airline industry. Have you ever been treated like you were completely invisible, only to discover the person ignoring you had made the biggest mistake of their career? The terminal bustled with typical morning energy. David Thompson moved through the crowds with purposeful steps, his posture straight and confident. The way he navigated the airport showed familiarity, checking departure boards with quick glances, automatically noting emergency exits, his eyes scanning crowds with trained awareness. Emma skipped beside him, her backpack decorated with airplane stickers bouncing with each step. "Daddy, will Grandma remember the stories about your flying adventures?" "She remembers everything, sweetheart." David's voice carried warmth mixed with something harder to define, the measured tone of someone accustomed to command. At the gate, David reviewed their boarding passes one final time. Flight 892, seats 12F and 12E, business class tickets he had carefully saved for months to afford. This was not just any trip. He was about to start his new position as Director of Aviation Safety Consulting in Washington, D.C., a role that would use decades of specialized experience he rarely discussed. The boarding area filled with the usual mix of business travelers, expensive suits, designer luggage, and the confident chatter of people accustomed to premium service. David and Emma were the only black passengers visible in the business class boarding line. Emma pulled out her worn copy of Famous Pilots in History, pages soft from countless readings. "Daddy, did you know Bessie Coleman was the first African-American pilot?" "I did know that." David smiled, remembering his own first aviation heroes. "She had to go to France to learn because no American school would teach her." The leather briefcase beside David contained more than work documents. Inside lay commendation letters, flight certificates, and a folder marked with Pentagon classification stamps. His vintage Omega Speedmaster, standard issue for test pilots, had survived missions he never spoke about, even to Emma. Rachel Simmons, the chief flight attendant, prepared for another routine shift. She had worked this route for some years, serving celebrities, politicians, and corporate executives. Her smile came easily for passengers who fit her expectations of business class clientele. Tyler Morales, the junior flight attendant, organized meal carts with nervous efficiency. Fresh from training, he still felt intimidated by Rachel's seniority and sharp criticism of any mistakes. The galley smelled of reheated beef, Wellington, and fresh coffee, aromas that would soon take on bitter associations. Captain Nicole Foster completed her pre-flight checklist in the cockpit. Decades of military and commercial flying had taught her to focus on technical details rather than cabin politics. She trusted her crew to handle passenger services while she managed the complex systems that would carry 180 souls safely to their destination. David noticed the subtle dynamics as they boarded. How Rachel's demeanor shifted when greeting different passengers. Her bright welcome aboard for a white woman with designer handbags. The cooler, "Please find your seats for an elderly Latino gentleman." The complete silence as David and Emma approached. Emma noticed too, though she could not articulate what felt wrong. The pretty lady with the shiny name tag had looked right at her, then looked away quickly. Emma was used to adults smiling when they saw her. Teachers called her bright and polite. This felt different. The cabin's cream leather seats and polished wood accents projected luxury and exclusivity. Overhead bins accommodated expensive luggage while reading lights cast warm pools of illumination. Business class promised comfort, attention, and service, promises that would prove selectively honored. David stored their carry-on carefully, noting the emergency equipment locations with automatic precision. Emma settled into her window seat, pressing her nose against the small oval portal to watch baggage carts and fuel trucks moving below. "Daddy, why is that lady not saying hello to us?" David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had faced this situation countless times in restaurants, hotels, government buildings where his clearance exceeded that of the people ignoring him. Some people are just busy, sweetheart. But his military training had taught him to assess threats and read situations. This was not random oversight. This was deliberate. And as the flight got underway, when Emma would ask for water for the third time, this careful ignore and exclude strategy would escalate into something much more serious. The engines began their low hum as the aircraft prepared for pushback. What should have been an exciting journey for a little girl visiting her grandmother was about to become a lesson in how prejudice operates in premium cabins 35,000 feet above ground. As the flight progressed, Emma's small voice cut through the cabin hum. "Daddy, I'm really thirsty." David pressed the call button above their seats. The soft chime echoed in the business class cabin, but Rachel Simmons continued organizing meal trays as if the sound came from empty air. Some time passed. David pressed the button again. Rachel glanced toward their row, her eyes scanning the area like she was looking for the source of an annoying noise, then returned to her tasks. The deliberate nature of her avoidance was becoming impossible to ignore. "Excuse me, Miss Simmons?" David's voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Could my daughter get some water, please?" Rachel froze for a split second, then continued walking past their row without acknowledging his words. Emma's confusion was written across her young face as she watched the flight attendant serve the gentleman across the aisle a full glass of orange juice and warm nuts. "Sir, would you like wine with your meal?" Rachel asked the white businessman in 12E, her voice suddenly warm and attentive. She leaned in close, her service smile bright and professional. "We have an excellent Chardonnay from Napa Valley." The contrast was jarring. Rachel's enthusiastic service for the passenger literally one seat away from David made her complete dismissal of Emma impossible to misinterpret. Emma whispered to her father, "Why is she talking to that man but not us?" David's military training had taught him patience under pressure, but watching his daughter's confusion was testing every limit. "Sometimes people get busy, sweetheart, but this was not busy. This was systematic exclusion, executed with practiced precision." Tyler Morales, the junior flight attendant, noticed the obvious pattern from the galley. He watched Rachel serve champagne to passengers in rows 10, 11, 13, and 14, carefully skipping row 12 where David and Emma sat. When he started toward them with a water pitcher, Rachel intercepted him with sharp efficiency. "I will handle that section," she said firmly, then promptly ignored the section entirely. The pattern continued with brutal consistency. Rachel distributed warm towels to every business class passenger except David and Emma. She offered newspapers and magazines to everyone except row 12. She provided pillows and blankets to all other passengers while walking past the father and daughter as if they were invisible furniture. Time passed. Emma's requests grew more desperate. "Daddy, my throat really hurts. Can you ask the lady again?" Dr. Catherine Ellis in 12A observed the situation with growing discomfort. As a pediatrician, she recognized a child's genuine distress. She also recognized discriminatory behavior when she saw it. The systematic, calculated nature of Rachel's service pattern. David stood up, his 6-foot frame moving with controlled precision toward the galley. His military bearing was evident in every step, the straight spine, measured pace, and alert awareness that marked career officers. Rachel saw him coming and immediately busied herself with paperwork. Her back turned deliberately toward the cabin. She shuffled meaningless forms while humming softly, performing an elaborate charade of being too occupied to notice his approach. "Miss Simmons." His voice remained steady but carried an edge that made other passengers look up from their magazines. "My daughter has been asking for water for a while now. What exactly is the problem here?" Rachel glanced over her shoulder with practiced indifference, her expression suggesting he was interrupting important work. "Sir, we are preparing meal service. Please return to your seat. Meal service for everyone except row 12. David's question hung in the air like an accusation. Several passengers had received full drink service, warm towels, nuts, and meal selections. The discrimination was becoming undeniable to anyone paying attention. "Sir, I serve all passengers according to our schedule," Rachel replied, her tone suggesting his question was unreasonable. David's response was measured but pointed. "Your schedule apparently has a very selective definition of all passengers." The comment drew nervous glances from nearby passengers who were beginning to recognize the obvious pattern of exclusion. Emma started crying quietly, overwhelmed by thirst, confusion, and the growing tension around her. The sound of a child in distress cut through the cabin's polite atmosphere like a knife. Her small shoulders shook as she tried to understand why the nice lady with the pretty uniform would not help her. Dr. Ellis stood up, her medical authority evident in her commanding presence. "Excuse me, that little girl clearly needs water. She's been waiting while you have served everyone else." Rachel's composure cracked slightly under professional scrutiny. "Ma'am, we have specific procedures for meal service timing. Your procedure is to ignore paying customers based on what criteria exactly, doctor?" Ellis's voice carried the sharp precision of someone accustomed to challenging incompetence. "I am a physician, and that child is showing signs of dehydration." The businessman in 12E, William Hayes, lowered his Wall Street Journal with obvious irritation. He had been watching the situation unfold while trying to focus on stock reports. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I have seen you serve everyone in this cabin except this family. What is your explanation?" Rachel's face flushed as she realized multiple passengers were now openly challenging her behavior. Being questioned publicly threatened her carefully maintained authority and exposed her actions to scrutiny she had hoped to avoid. "I serve passengers according to our established flight protocols," she replied defensively. "Which protocol requires ignoring a young girl asking for water?" David's question was delivered with the precision of a military briefing. His calm demeanor made Rachel's flustered behavior look even more unreasonable by comparison. A younger passenger in row 14 pulled out her phone, recognizing a potentially viral moment unfolding. The camera captured Rachel's obvious discomfort as she realized her discrimination was being documented for potential social media exposure. Rachel noticed the recording, and her anxiety spiked. "Ma'am, please put your phone away. This is inappropriate." "What is inappropriate is a child being ignored," the young woman replied, continuing to film. "Miss, I just want some water," Emma said directly to Rachel, her voice small but perfectly clear. The innocence and politeness in her request made Rachel's continued refusal seem not just unreasonable, but actively cruel. Rachel's solution was to walk away entirely, retreating to the front galley where she pretended to check inventory with exaggerated focus. Her complete abandonment of the situation confirmed that her behavior was intentional rather than accidental oversight. Tyler Morales could not watch the discrimination continue. He approached David with genuine concern and professional embarrassment. "Sir, I'm so incredibly sorry about this. Let me get your daughter some water right away." "Tyler," Rachel's sharp voice cracked across the cabin like a whip. "I explicitly told you that I handle that section, but you are not handling it," Tyler replied, his usually quiet voice finding unexpected strength. "They are paying customers with the same rights as everyone else on this aircraft." The confrontation between crew members drew every passenger's attention. Business-class cabins were not supposed to feature public arguments between staff members, especially arguments over basic service for a thirsty child. Rachel marched back with determined aggression, her professional facade completely abandoned. "Tyler, step aside immediately. I will decide when, how, and if I serve my assigned passengers." "Your assigned passengers." Dr. Ellis's voice rose with medical authority. "They are human beings with basic needs, not assignments you can choose to ignore based on personal prejudice." The word prejudice hung in the recycled cabin air like an electric charge. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that the situation had moved beyond simple poor service into something much more serious. David maintained his position near the galley, his presence forcing Rachel to either acknowledge him or continue revealing her prejudice to the entire cabin. His military bearing, straight posture, steady gaze, calm authority under pressure made her flustered, defensive behavior appear increasingly unreasonable. "Sir, I am ordering you to return to your seat immediately," Rachel demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled irritation. "After my daughter receives the water she has been politely requesting." David's response was simple, reasonable, and impossible to argue against from any logical standpoint. Emma had stopped crying, but her eyes remained wide with confusion and hurt. She had never experienced such obvious systematic rejection from an adult. In her young understanding of the world, grown-ups helped children, especially when they asked politely and said, "Please." Paul Anderson, the businessman in 12G, closed his laptop with obvious frustration. I have flown business class on hundreds of flights, and I have never witnessed service this deliberately selective. The word selective carried obvious implications that made several passengers nod in uncomfortable recognition. Rachel realized she was trapped in a situation of her own making. Continuing to refuse service would confirm the discrimination allegations now being openly discussed. But providing service at this point would essentially admit her previous behavior was wrong and potentially actionable. Her solution was deflection and intimidation. "Sir, if you continue to disrupt this flight and interfere with crew operations, we will be forced to report you to federal authorities when we land." The threat was absurd. A father politely requesting water for his thirsty child could hardly be characterized as disruptive behavior, but it revealed Rachel's willingness to escalate rather than simply perform basic job duties. David's response carried quiet authority that made the entire cabin pause. "Miss Simmons, I strongly suggest you consider very carefully what you say next." Something in his tone, not anger or frustration, but the unmistakable voice of someone who understood exactly how these situations worked and their potential consequences, made Rachel hesitate for the first time. Ellis stood up again, her medical authority adding unmistakable weight to the confrontation. "I am formally requesting that you provide immediate basic service to these passengers." The cabin atmosphere grew thick with tension. Several passengers had stopped pretending to read, openly watching the discrimination unfold in real time. The hum of aircraft engines seemed quieter against the charged silence. Emma looked up at her father with complete trust, even as she struggled to understand why the pretty lady with the shiny name tag had become so mean. Her innocence in the face of such obvious prejudice made Rachel's behavior seem increasingly monstrous. "Ma'am, please do not interfere with crew operations," Rachel snapped at Dr. Ellis, her composure cracking further under public scrutiny. "Crew operations?" Dr. Ellis's voice rose with professional indignation. "You mean the operation of systematically ignoring paying customers based on their race?" The word race cut through the cabin like a blade. Rachel's face flushed deep red as she realized the discrimination was now being called out explicitly. "That is a very serious accusation," Rachel replied, her voice trembling with defensive anger. "I serve all passengers equally." "Then serve them," David said quietly, his calm voice contrasting sharply with Rachel's agitation. But Rachel had passed the point of rational de-escalation. Instead of simply getting Emma water, she doubled down on her position with increasing hostility. "Sir, I do not appreciate your attitude or your implications," Rachel declared loudly enough for the entire business class section to hear. Some passengers seemed to think they are entitled to special treatment. The irony was staggering. David and Emma were not asking for special treatment. They were asking for the same treatment every other passenger had received. Tyler Morales stepped forward with visible frustration. "Rachel, just give the kid some water. This is getting out of hand. Do not you dare tell me how to do my job." Rachel hissed. "I have been flying these routes for some years. I know exactly what kind of passengers belong in business class, and which ones are probably here on some kind of charity upgrade." The racist implication hung in the recycled air like poison gas. Several passengers gasped audibly. The young woman recording raised her phone higher, ensuring she captured every word. Emma tugged on her father's sleeve, her voice small and confused. "Daddy, what is a charity upgrade? Are we not supposed to be here?" David's jaw tightened as he knelt beside his daughter. "Sweetheart, we belong wherever we have tickets to be. Do not let anyone tell you different." But the damage was done. Emma's excitement about flying in the nice seats had transformed into shame and confusion about whether they deserved to be there. William Hayes, the businessman in 12E, stood up with corporate authority. "Ma'am, I run a Fortune 500 company, and if any of my employees spoke to customers like this, they would be terminated immediately." Rachel's response revealed the depth of her prejudice. "Sir, I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining certain standards in premium cabins." "Standards?" Hayes's voice carried the sharp edge of a CEO who had just heard something unacceptable. "What standards are you referring to exactly?" Rachel realized she had stepped into dangerous territory, but could not stop herself from digging deeper. "Well, business class passengers typically have a certain profile: education, income level, professional background. It is important to maintain the right atmosphere for our valued customers." Dr. Ellis laughed bitterly. The right atmosphere? You mean whites only? I never said that, Rachel protested, but her meaning was crystal clear to everyone listening. The young passenger recording spoke up. Actually, you kind of did. This is all being live-streamed right now. Rachel's face went pale as she realized her discriminatory comments were being broadcast in real time to potentially thousands of viewers. Turn that off immediately. Free speech, the young woman replied calmly. Public space, public behavior. Paul Anderson closed his newspaper entirely, his patience exhausted. Miss, I have watched you serve champagne, nuts, and warm towels to every passenger in this section except this family. Then you suggested they do not belong here because of their profile. What exactly do you think we are all witnessing? Rachel's panic was becoming obvious. She had expected passive compliance or quiet resentment, not organized resistance from multiple passengers. You are all misunderstanding the situation. Then explain it, David said calmly. Help us understand why my daughter cannot get water. Instead of backing down, Rachel made her worst mistake yet. She looked directly at Emma and spoke with cold deliberation. Little girl, sometimes when people cannot afford the nice seats, they get upset when they do not get extra attention. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But Daddy said we could afford it. Daddy saved money for months. The cruelty of targeting a child directly shocked even the passengers who had been trying to stay neutral. A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin. David stood slowly, his military training keeping his movements controlled despite the rage building inside him. Miss Simmons, you just made this very, very personal. Something in his tone, quiet, measured but carrying unmistakable authority, made Rachel take a step backward. For the first time, she seemed to recognize she might have misjudged her target. Dr. Ellis pulled out her phone. I'm calling the airline's customer service line right now. This is beyond unacceptable. Ma'am, please do not make unnecessary calls, Rachel pleaded, her bravado crumbling. Unnecessary? Dr. Ellis's voice rose. You just told a young girl she does not belong here because of her skin color. I'm not just calling customer service. I'm filing a federal discrimination complaint. Tyler Morales looked stricken. Rachel, what are you doing? These are good people. Just apologize and get them some water. Do not tell me what to do, Rachel snapped. And do not lecture me about good people. I can spot trouble when I see it. Trouble? David asked quietly. What trouble do you see, Miss Simmons? Please be specific. Rachel realized she had painted herself into a corner. She could not articulate what trouble a well-dressed father and his polite daughter represented without revealing her racial prejudice explicitly. Sir, I do not have to explain my professional judgment to you, she replied defensively. The businessman in 12G laughed harshly. Professional judgment. Is that what we are calling racism now? Emma had started crying again, overwhelmed by the hostile atmosphere and her growing understanding that the pretty lady disliked her for reasons she could not comprehend. Daddy, I want to go home, Emma whispered. I do not like it here anymore. Hearing his daughter's distress broke David's careful composure. Miss Simmons, you have just reduced my young daughter to tears because you cannot do your job without bringing your personal prejudices into it. I do not have prejudices, Rachel protested, but her defense sounded hollow after her previous comments. Then prove it, Dr. Ellis challenged. Get that child some water right now. Rachel stood frozen, unable to move forward or backward. Providing service now would feel like admitting wrongdoing, but continuing to refuse would confirm everything the passengers suspected about her motives. Her solution was to escalate rather than capitulate. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and stop disrupting other passengers' flights. He is not disrupting anything, Hayes said firmly. You are. Your behavior is the disruption. The recording passenger's live stream was gaining viewers rapidly. Comments poured in expressing outrage at Rachel's treatment of Emma. Hashtags like airline discrimination and racist flight attendant began trending. People are furious about this, the young woman announced. Thousands of people are watching this happen right now. Rachel's panic reached a new level. Please stop recording. This is being taken out of context. What context makes refusing water to a child acceptable? Dr. Ellis demanded. And David checked his vintage pilot watch, a movement that caught Rachel's attention. Something about the timepiece seemed familiar, but she could not place why. Miss Simmons, David said with final clarity, I'm formally requesting to speak with Captain Foster immediately. Rachel's face went white. Involving the captain would mean official reports, witness statements, and documentation of her behavior. "Sir, the captain is busy with flight operations." "Then get me the first officer or flight engineer," David replied. "This situation requires immediate attention from flight deck personnel." Tyler Morales stepped forward decisively. "I will call the cockpit myself. This has gone way too far." "Tyler, do not you dare," Rachel began. "Ma'am, I am not watching a child suffer because of your issues," Tyler replied firmly. He reached for the interphone connecting to the flight deck. Rachel grabbed his arm. "Do not involve the captain in passenger complaints." "This is not a complaint anymore," Tyler said, shaking off her grip. "This is discrimination, and Captain Foster needs to know what is happening in her cabin." The interphone crackled to life. "Cockpit, Captain Foster, this is Tyler. We need you in the cabin immediately. We have a serious situation involving passenger services and potential civil rights violations." A pause. "I will be right down." Rachel's world began collapsing around her. In minutes, her behavior would be reviewed by a captain known for taking passenger rights seriously. Her career, her authority, her carefully maintained position, all threatened by her inability to simply treat a black family with basic human dignity. Emma looked up at her father through tears. "Is the captain going to help us, Daddy?" David's smile was gentle, but his eyes carried something harder. "Yes, sweetheart. The captain is definitely going to help us." The cockpit door opened with a mechanical click that silenced the entire cabin. Captain Nicole Foster stepped into the business class section, her uniform crisp and authoritative. Decades of flying experience evident in her confident stride. She surveyed the tense scene, Rachel standing defensively near the galley, Tyler holding the interphone, passengers openly staring, and Emma crying quietly in her father's arms. Her pilot's eyes, trained to assess situations quickly, took in every detail. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Foster asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that commanded respect in cockpits worldwide. Rachel immediately launched into damage control. "Captain, we have a passenger who has been disrupting service and making unreasonable demands." Foster held up her hand for silence, her attention drawn to the man standing protectively beside the window seat. Something about his posture, his bearing, the way he held himself under pressure seemed familiar. Then her eyes fell on his vintage Omega Speedmaster pilot's watch. Captain Foster's face went through a rapid transformation. Confusion, recognition, then complete shock. Her professional composure cracked as her eyes widened in disbelief. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping closer. "David, Colonel David Thompson." The cabin fell dead silent. Every conversation stopped. Every passenger turned to stare. David straightened to his full height, and suddenly his military bearing was unmistakable. "Hello, Nicole. It has been a while." Captain Foster's voice trembled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the stunned cabin, "you are looking at Colonel David Thompson, United States Air Force, the youngest African-American pilot to command a fighter squadron in Air Force history." Rachel's face drained of all color as the magnitude of her mistake hit her like a physical blow. Foster continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Colonel Thompson is also the most decorated test pilot of his generation. He flew experimental aircraft that most pilots would not dare touch. He commanded rescue missions in Afghanistan that saved hundreds of lives." Emma looked up at her father with wide eyes, suddenly understanding why the captain seemed so excited to see him. But more than that, Foster's voice cracked with emotion. "Colonel Thompson saved my life when my helicopter went down in hostile territory near Kandahar. He disobeyed direct orders to fly into enemy fire and pull my crew out of a crash site. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the aircraft's climate control system cycling." Foster turned to address the passengers directly. "Years ago, then Major Thompson flew a damaged rescue helicopter through enemy fire to extract my crew. He took shrapnel in his shoulder and kept flying. 3 of us are alive today because this man refused to leave us behind." David's response was characteristically humble. "Nicole, that was our job. Any pilot would have done the same." "No, sir, they would not have," Foster replied firmly. "The area was declared too hot for rescue. Command ordered all aircraft to abort. You came anyway." She turned back to the cabin, her voice carrying the conviction of someone sharing absolute truth. "Colonel Thompson received the Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission. But that is just one of many major decorations in his file." Emma tugged on her father's sleeve, her voice filled with awe. Daddy, you are a hero. David knelt beside his daughter, his voice gentle. I'm just a pilot who did his job, sweetheart. The real heroes are the people we helped. Foster was not finished. Colonel Thompson also holds advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering and aviation safety. He has consulted on aircraft design for Boeing and Lockheed Martin. He has literally written the textbooks on emergency flight procedures that we study today. The interphone crackled to life. Captain, this is First Officer Mitchell. Is everything okay down there? Foster keyed the mic. Ryan, please come to the cabin. Bring Anthony with you. Within moments, First Officer Ryan Mitchell and Flight Engineer Anthony Rivera emerged from the cockpit. When they saw David, their reactions were immediate and unmistakable. Sir, First Officer Mitchell snapped to attention with a crisp salute. Colonel Thompson, it is an honor, sir. I studied your emergency landing procedures at the Academy. Flight Engineer Rivera stepped forward with obvious respect. Colonel, your innovations in systems redundancy are still standard protocol, sir. It is truly an honor to meet you. David returned their salutes with practiced precision, then immediately put them at ease. Gentlemen, I am flying as a civilian today with my daughter, but the damage to Rachel's position was complete and irreversible. She stood frozen, realizing she had spent the flight systematically discriminating against one of the most respected pilots in modern aviation history. Dr. Ellis started laughing, not with humor, but with amazed disbelief. You have been treating a distinguished Flying Cross recipient like he was invisible. The passenger who had been recording looked directly into her camera. People, you are not going to believe this. The man, this flight attendant, has been refusing to serve water. He is literally a decorated war hero. Emma beamed with newfound pride, finally understanding why her daddy sometimes seemed different from other fathers. Daddy flies the fast planes that help people. Foster's voice carried steel as she turned to Rachel. Miss Simmons, you have just spent the flight discriminating against a man who has risked his life repeatedly for this country. A man whose expertise in aviation safety exceeds that of most airline management. Rachel tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. I had no idea, Colonel. I'm so sorry. David's response showed the grace that had made him a respected leader. Miss Simmons, the problem is not that you did not know who I am. The problem is that you treated a father and his young daughter with disrespect based solely on the color of our skin. Foster nodded approvingly. Exactly right, sir. Rank and service record should not matter. Every passenger deserves basic human dignity. The power dynamic had completely flipped. Rachel, who moments earlier had been wielding petty authority to humiliate David and Emma, now stood utterly powerless before a man whose actual authority and accomplishments dwarfed anything she could imagine. Emma looked around the cabin at all the adults, showing her daddy such respect. Daddy, does this mean we can get some water now? The entire cabin erupted in laughter, the tension finally breaking as everyone recognized the absurd simplicity of what this had always been about. A thirsty child asking for basic service. Captain Foster's expression hardened as she processed the full scope of what had transpired in her cabin. Miss Simmons, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Rachel's face crumpled. Captain, please. I did not know he was— Stop right there. Foster cut her off sharply. You did not know he was what? Important enough to deserve basic human decency. The question hung in the air like an indictment. Rachel had no answer that would not further condemn her. David stood up, still holding Emma's hand. Captain Foster, my daughter would still like that water she asked for. Of course, sir. Foster personally retrieved a bottle of premium water and knelt to Emma's level. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry about how you were treated on my aircraft. Emma accepted the water gratefully. Thank you. Why was that lady so mean to us? Foster's jaw tightened as she struggled to explain adult prejudice to a young girl. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, honey, but we are going to make sure it never happens again. First Officer Mitchell approached Rachel with grim professionalism. Ma'am, I need your crew badge and airline identification immediately. Rachel's hands shook as she removed her nameplate and company ID. Her seniority, benefits, and career advancement dissolved in seconds. Please, this is all a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Dr. Ellis interjected, was your assumption that you could treat passengers differently based on race without consequences. Flight Engineer Rivera was already on the radio with airline headquarters. Operations, this is Flight 892. We have a Code 7 passenger services violation requiring management attention upon arrival. Tyler Morales approached David with genuine remorse. Sir, I should have intervened sooner. I knew what she was doing was wrong. David's response was gracious. Tyler, you did speak up when it mattered. That took courage. Foster keyed her radio. Ground control, this is Captain Foster. Please have airline management and legal representatives standing by at gate C14. We have a serious incident requiring immediate attention. Rachel made one final desperate attempt. Colonel Thompson, surely we can resolve this quietly. I have learned my lesson. David's response was measured but firm. Miss Simmons, this is not about punishment. It is about ensuring no other family experiences what we did today. The young passenger recording addressed her live stream audience. This flight attendant just got fired for discriminating against a decorated war hero. Justice served in real time, people. Her viewer count had exploded. Comments poured in expressing satisfaction at Rachel's swift consequences. Dr. Ellis pulled out her business card. Colonel, I am documenting everything I witnessed today. This behavior was systematic and deliberate. William Hayes, the businessman, added his support. Sir, I run a major corporation. I will gladly provide a statement about what I observed. This was textbook discrimination. Foster addressed the entire cabin with command authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize on behalf of our airline. The behavior you witnessed does not represent our values or standards. Several passengers applauded, creating an atmosphere of collective support for David and Emma. Rachel gathered her personal items with tears streaming down her face. Her confident authority had evaporated, replaced by the reality of unemployment and potential legal consequences. Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, why is the lady crying now? David knelt beside his daughter. Sometimes when people do wrong things, they feel sad when they realize their mistakes have consequences. Foster coordinated with ground operations. We will need airport security standing by. Miss Simmons will be escorted off the aircraft first and turned over to airline management for immediate termination proceedings. Tyler Morales was officially promoted on the spot. Tyler, you are now acting chief flight attendant for the remainder of this flight. Your integrity today was exemplary. The cabin atmosphere had completely transformed. Passengers who earlier seemed uncomfortable now openly expressed support for David and Emma. Sir, thank you for your service, called out Paul Anderson from row 12G. Colonel, my son is in the Air Force. You are exactly the kind of leader he looks up to, added another passenger. Emma beamed with pride as she finally understood why everyone was treating her daddy with such respect. Rachel was escorted to the front of the aircraft by Foster personally. Miss Simmons, you will be met by security and management. Your employment is terminated and you will face a full investigation by both the airline and federal authorities. As Rachel disappeared toward the exit, the cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Justice had been swift, decisive, and completely satisfying. Emma clapped along enthusiastically. Daddy, everyone is happy now. David smiled, finally relaxing as the immediate crisis passed. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes standing up for what is right makes everyone happy. The flight could finally continue with dignity restored and prejudice decisively defeated. After the flight landed, the story had exploded across national media. The recorded footage of Rachel Simmons's discrimination against a decorated war hero became the most watched airline incident video in social media history. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Decorated Air Force Colonel discriminated against on flight." The video had been viewed over 10 million times, with comments expressing outrage at Rachel's behavior and admiration for David's grace under pressure. The Department of Transportation launched a federal civil rights investigation. Lead investigator Maria Lopez arrived at the airline's headquarters, armed with witness statements, video evidence, and a mandate to examine systemic discrimination practices. This case represents a clear violation of federal aviation civil rights regulations, Lopez announced at a press conference. We are investigating not just this incident, but patterns of discriminatory behavior throughout the airline industry. Rachel Simmons's termination was just the beginning of her consequences. She faced federal civil rights charges carrying potential prison time and lifetime bans from aviation employment. Her discriminatory comments, captured on video and witnessed by multiple passengers, provided ironclad evidence of intentional racial bias. The airline's legal team scrambled to contain the damage. CEO Richard Caldwell personally called David to apologize and offer comprehensive compensation. Colonel Thompson, what happened on Flight 892 is antithetical to everything we claim to stand for as a company. David's response was characteristically focused on systemic change rather than personal gain. Mr. Caldwell, I do not want money. I want guarantees that no family will ever experience what my daughter and I endured. Congressional attention came swiftly. Representative Marcus Reed, chairman of the House Transportation Committee, announced immediate hearings on airline discrimination. Colonel Thompson's experience represents the tip of an iceberg. We are going to examine how pervasive these practices are throughout commercial aviation. The airline industry faced a public relations catastrophe. Other carriers proactively reviewed their policies, desperate to avoid similar incidents. Stock prices for major airlines dropped as investors recognized the potential for widespread litigation and regulatory changes. David was invited to testify before Congress, where his calm, professional demeanor provided a stark contrast to the ugly discrimination he had experienced. Members of Congress, this is not about my military service or decorations. This is about fundamental human dignity for all passengers. His testimony was watched by millions of Americans. Emma sat in the gallery, watching her father address the nation's lawmakers with the same quiet authority she had always known, but was only beginning to understand. My young daughter asked me why the flight attendant would not give her water, David continued. How do you explain to a child that some adults judge people by skin color rather than character? The hearing room was completely silent, as David's words carried the weight of both personal experience and national conscience. Expert testimony followed from civil rights attorneys, aviation safety specialists, and discrimination researchers. Dr. Rebecca Collins, a leading civil rights lawyer, testified about the broader implications. Colonel Thompson's case demonstrates how discrimination operates in premium service environments, Dr. Collins explained. The perpetrator felt entitled to exclude passengers she deemed unworthy of business-class service based purely on racial assumptions. Now, the video evidence was played repeatedly during the hearings, with Rachel's racist comments about charity upgrades and passenger profiles serving as textbook examples of discriminatory mindset. Federal prosecutors filed formal charges against Rachel Simmons under the Civil Rights Act. She faced up to 3 years in federal prison and $50,000 in fines for willful discrimination in public accommodation services. Rachel's defense attorney attempted to portray her actions as poor judgment rather than racial bias, but the video evidence was devastating. Her comments about passenger profiles and standards left no room for alternative interpretation. The trial became a national spectacle. David's testimony was dignified and powerful, focusing on the impact on Emma rather than his own mistreatment. She asked me if we did not belong there. A young child questioned her own worth because of an adult's prejudice. Dr. Ellis, Tyler Morales, and multiple passengers testified about the systematic nature of Rachel's discrimination. The prosecution built an airtight case demonstrating intentional, prolonged racist behavior. Rachel's sentencing hearing drew national attention. Federal Judge Deborah Hayes delivered a scathing rebuke along with the maximum penalty, 3 years in federal prison, $50,000 in fines, and lifetime prohibition from employment in any federally regulated transportation industry. Ms. Simmons, Judge Hayes stated, "You systematically denied basic human dignity to a family based solely on racial prejudice. Your actions violated federal law and fundamental American values. The airline faced massive institutional changes mandated by federal regulators. The Department of Transportation imposed unprecedented requirements. Mandatory bias training for all employees, federal monitoring of service complaints, and zero-tolerance policies with automatic termination for discriminatory behavior. Congress passed the Aviation Passenger Dignity Act, establishing federal oversight of airline discrimination complaints and requiring annual bias training certification for all airline personnel. The legislation included provisions named after Emma, the Children's Civil Rights Protection Clause, ensuring that discrimination affecting minors would face enhanced penalties and mandatory federal investigation. David established the Invisible Passengers Foundation, funded by airline settlements and public donations to support victims of transportation discrimination and provide bias training resources industry-wide. The Foundation's first initiative was a children's program teaching young people about civil rights and dignity. Emma became the program's youngest advocate, speaking to elementary school classes about standing up for fairness. International attention followed with airlines in Europe, Asia, and Australia implementing similar anti-discrimination protocols based on David's case. The incident became a global catalyst for aviation industry reform. Tyler Morales, promoted to regional training director, developed new service protocols emphasizing equal treatment regardless of passenger background. His program became the industry standard for bias prevention training. Captain Foster was promoted to Chief of Flight Operations and spearheaded the airline's new Dignity in Flight program, ensuring all crew members understood that discrimination would result in immediate termination and federal prosecution. Airlines reported a 70% decrease in discrimination complaints after the new policies. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers increased dramatically as the industry acknowledged that equal treatment was not optional. Rachel Simmons served her full sentence in federal prison, becoming a cautionary example of how personal prejudice could destroy careers and freedom. Her case was studied in law schools as a perfect example of swift civil rights justice. David's advocacy extended beyond aviation. He consulted with hotels, restaurants, and retail chains on bias prevention, using his experience to help other industries recognize and eliminate discriminatory practices. The ripple effects continued expanding as David's story inspired similar accountability in other service industries. His quiet dignity in the face of discrimination had catalyzed nationwide change. Emma, now understanding the full significance of that day, often told her classmates, "My daddy showed everyone that being different does not mean being less important." The case established permanent legal precedent that discrimination in premium services carried the same federal penalties as any other civil rights violation, ending the fiction that higher-priced services could operate with different standards of human dignity. Sometime after the flight, David Thompson stood in his office overlooking Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. His title read, Director of Aviation Civil Rights Compliance, a position created specifically to prevent future discrimination incidents throughout the federal aviation system. On his desk sat a framed photo of Emma presenting her award-winning essay, Why Everyone Deserves Dignity, to her class. She had become the youngest advocate ever recognized by the NAACP for her work promoting equality education in elementary schools. The airline that once discriminated against them had been transformed into an industry leader in inclusive service. Their Equal Skies initiative was now the gold standard for civil rights compliance, studied and implemented by carriers worldwide. Emma burst into his office after school, her backpack covered with airplane pins from different airlines, gifts from pilots who had heard their story. "Daddy, guess what? Ms. Lopez wants me to speak at the high school about standing up for what is right." David smiled, remembering his young daughter crying in seat 12F, confused by adult cruelty she could not understand. A little older now, Emma had become a confident advocate who understood that her experience could help others. "Are you ready for that kind of responsibility, sweetheart? You taught me that when bad things happen, we can make them into good things for other people," Emma replied with the wisdom that still amazed him. Captain Nicole Foster stopped by their office regularly, bringing updates on the aviation industry's continued progress. Discrimination complaints had dropped dramatically across all major carriers as the David Thompson protocol became standard training for flight crews worldwide. Tyler Morales, now Regional Director of Customer Experience, had revolutionized service training throughout the industry. His programs emphasized that excellent service meant treating every passenger with equal dignity, regardless of their appearance or assumptions about their background. Rachel Simmons had been released from federal prison after serving her full sentence. She now worked for a nonprofit organization teaching bias awareness, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about how prejudice destroys both its victims and perpetrators. Her mandated community service included speaking to aviation workers about the consequences of discrimination. "I lost my career, my freedom, and my reputation because I could not see past skin color to recognize human dignity," she told audiences with genuine remorse. The congressional legislation triggered by their incident had expanded beyond aviation. The Dignity in Service Act now covered all federally regulated transportation, requiring bias training and zero-tolerance policies for discrimination in buses, trains, airports, and taxi services. David often reflected on how one moment of standing up for his daughter had catalyzed nationwide change. "Emma asked for water, and we ended up transforming an industry," he would tell audiences during speaking engagements. The Invisible Passengers Foundation had helped thousands of discrimination victims obtain justice and compensation. More importantly, their education programs had trained tens of thousands of service workers in bias recognition and prevention. Emma's favorite part of their story was visiting schools to teach children about equality. "Everyone deserves to be seen and treated nicely," she would tell kindergartners. "It does not matter what color you are or what clothes you wear." Dr. Catherine Ellis remained close to their family, often joining David at medical conferences where he spoke about the health impacts of discrimination stress on children. Their work had influenced pediatric guidelines for recognizing and treating discrimination trauma. The young passenger whose live stream had documented Rachel's behavior became a civil rights journalism major, inspired by how social media could expose injustice and drive accountability. Her footage remained the most watched discrimination incident video in internet history. David's final reflection on their experience always returned to the same theme. "That day on Flight 892, Emma taught me something important. When she asked why the lady would not help us, she was not asking about race or prejudice, concepts she did not understand yet. She was asking about basic human kindness. Here is what I learned. You do not have to be a decorated military officer to deserve dignity. You do not have to achieve anything special to be worthy of respect. The only qualification for being treated as a human being is being human. Change does not always require anger or confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand quietly and remind people of their humanity." Emma's simple request for water became a reminder that every person, regardless of age, race, or status, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that everyone deserves dignity. Subscribe for more stories, proving that standing up for what is right can create change that lasts for generations. Ring that notification bell, because justice stories like this one prove that ordinary people can create extraordinary transformation. Tell me in the comments, when you witness discrimination, will you speak up? Your voice could be the one that changes everything. Emma was young when she asked for water and accidentally changed an industry. What change will you create? That unforgettable flight taught us one of life's most powerful and emotional lessons. True dignity is not something we earn through titles, uniforms, or accomplishments. It is something every human being deserves simply because we exist. In the quiet heartbreak of a thirsty little girl being ignored while others were served with smiles, we saw how prejudice can wound the innocent in the cruelest way. Yet, in the same moment, we witnessed something even stronger. The quiet strength of a father who refused to let his daughter feel invisible, and the courage of strangers who chose to speak up when silence would have been easier. The story reminds us that real change rarely begins with grand gestures. It often starts with something as simple as a child asking for water, and one person brave enough to say, "This is not right." No matter who we are, where we come from, or what seat we sit in, every soul on this journey called life deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with basic human kindness. Prejudice doesn't just hurt the person it targets, it diminishes all of us. But courage, compassion, and standing up for what is right can heal and transform everything around us. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. And if you believe in stories that remind us of our shared humanity, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful tale. Drop a comment below. When you witness someone being treated unfairly, will you choose to speak up? Your voice might be the one that changes everything for someone else. Thank you for being here. Together, we can keep building a world where no child ever has to wonder why they're being ignored.